Emanuel Lasker, The Life of a Chess Master. Dr. Jannak. Emanuel Lasker, The Life of a Chess Master, with annotations of more than 100 of his greatest games. Foreword by Albert Einstein. Translated by Heinrich Frankl. Chapter 2. The Hungry Schoolboy. When Bertold went to the big city of Berlin to study, the happiest part of Emanuel's childhood came to an end. As for Bertold, he had to make a living somehow. His parents were too poor to make him even the most modest allowance, and yet so proud were they of their son's cleverness that it would never have occurred to them that he could go in for anything less than an academic career. He had to go to grammar school first for matriculation, and then went on to the university to study medicine. He managed to earn the pittance here and there by tutoring and by all manner of odd jobs, but he rarely had enough to eat. Yet, he was an excellent scholar, much admired by his landlord, the poor East End tailor who had numerous children of his own, usually too hungry to bother about any kind of learning. Whenever Bertold brought home one of his model reports, it was a black day for the tailor's family, for he would spank one after the other of his offsprings, shouting to each of them in turn, "Such a brain you should have, you chamber, such a brain as Bertold's self indeed." There was nothing wrong with Bertold's brain, but his stomach left much to be desired. It was therefore a lucky break for the hungry young student to learn that two old ladies had opened a tea room and were looking for someone to teach chess and certain card games. Bertold's prowess at both chess and skat was not inconsiderable, and he did quite well in the tea room, making as much as a mark or two in a few hours. He felt immensely rich and on the threshold of even greater affluence, and he wrote home about his stroke of luck. He may have exaggerated a little, and he was somewhat vague about the precarious source of his earnings, but his letter certainly served to make the parents even prouder of their clever son, and presently, Tauberlinchen, or at any rate its Jewish community, was gossiping about young Bertold up in Berlin, being practically a millionaire. In such pleasing circumstances nothing could have seemed more natural than to pack off young Emanuel, now 11 years old, to go to school in the big city. Surely, his rich brother would take good care of him and see to it that he too was safely set on the high road to wisdom and success. Father Adolf, as gullible as ever, was quite Emanuel Lasker 14, exuberant about the prospects, and almost angry when Mother Rosalie ventured to voice some misgivings. Who is to look after the little boy in the big city? Who is to look after him? Why, Bertold, of course. Who else should look after him but his own brother? And who is to cook? Cook. Father Adolf was quite indignant about so typically female a question. "My dear Rosalie," he said, "it may be important to eat, but it is far more important to learn." So it came to pass that Emanuel, aged all of 11, left his native Berlin to go to Berlin. For Bertold it meant quite a shock and a staggering responsibility. Yet, he was happy to have little Emanuel around. So happy indeed that in the first flush of excitement he forgot all about making the proper application for his brother's test in school. When he took him there it appeared that no more applications were acceptable that term. Emanuel cried bitterly, but Bertold got very busy and discovered a school where the tests for the forthcoming term were still open to application. Moreover, Emanuel was particularly lucky in his test. They happened to give him the very sums he had been swatting up the day before, and of course he passed with ease. But he could well have done without that stroke of luck, for his mathematical talent had been evident even in early childhood. At the age of 5 he had greatly astonished Herr Ludwig, the head of the local school, by doing multiplication such as 7x 53 or 18x 96 in his head. When the doubting teacher suggested that the child had been specially coached, young Emanuel protested vehemently and demanded to be asked something more difficult. He was asked, and he coped just as promptly, thereby achieving some local fame before he was old enough to go to school. A few years later his teacher Frau Ludwig, the head's daughter, would say that Emanuel was far and away the best pupil they ever had in Berlin. And now, in the big city of Berlin, he did equally well, his entry test being so brilliant that he was put to classes above his age group. He was blissfully happy, but alas, he went down with measles, was more than usually feverish, and had to go to hospital. Young Emanuel was pining for school and unhappy to be kept away from it in the idleness of a sick bed. Yet, It so happened that here was the point of departure for the very career that was to make him world famous. At his wits' end as to how to keep that eager young mind adequately occupied, Bertrand thought of teaching the restless patient to play chess. The boy grasped it with just the same avid eagerness he would apply to any mental exercise. He asked the hungry schoolboy 15 for some chess books, devoured them like all his other books, and soon turned out to be a quite proficient chess player for his age. But there was nothing extraordinary about it. He certainly wasn't a prodigy, nor did he take chess very seriously at that time. It was merely a hobby and a stimulating pastime. His real ambition aimed rather higher. The schoolboy Emanuel dreamed of becoming a great mathematician, a philosopher, a physicist, a biologist. To some extent the dream was to come true, but not without some detours forced upon him by grim necessity and the hard facts of the struggle to keep alive. When a boy has one pair of boots only which badly need soling, and when no money is available for that purpose, it is not easy to march along the direct route to one's dreamland. Without boots one cannot march. One can only sit at home until the brother, teaching chess and playing scat in the old lady's tea room, has earned enough pfennigs to collect the boots from the cobbler and to bring home a bit of food too. Such experience, frequently repeated, may have been enough to make a boy bitter, but it would make him tough too, not easily cowed by anybody or any argument. In the long run the wretched circumstances of the two boys could not be kept from their naively gullible parents. When Russel learned that Bertrand's alleged affluence was mainly based on gambling in a tea room and that little Emanuel was also knocking about there, so as to scrounge a snack from time to time, she resolutely decided on a radical change. What mattered, she thought, was to separate the boys, so that Bertrand would find it less difficult to make ends meet, while Emanuel would be saved from the temptations of the tea room. Russel dug out an elderly acquaintance living miles away from Bertrand, and the old woman agreed to give Emanuel board and lodging and to look after him. He had to be changed to another school too, nearer his new abode. As a matter of fact, the boy's new home wasn't any better than the old one. He wasn't looked after at all, nor did he have any more to eat than he used to have. Above all, he was pining for his brother and the free and easy life he had got used to. But then he was miles away, almost at the other end of the great city. To go there by tramcar and horse bus would cost 10 or 15 pfennigs, and who could think of wasting so much money? But, given a few hours, one can't walk even the capital city from end to end, so, night after night Emanuel set out on the long journey to the tea room, to see his brother and to watch the games. All day he passed diligently at school and at his homework, and much of his nightly sleep he gave up for what to him was the romance of his young life, watching the games in the carefree atmosphere of the tea room. 16 Emanuel Lasker. He met many interesting people there, including an undergraduate by the name of Bertrand who was to be his antagonist for a lifetime. But in those days, it was beneath the dignity of a university student and a budding chess master to pay much attention to a wretched little boy who, often enough, would annoy his elders by sinning against the basic rule of kibitzing, to watch in silence and, above all, to refrain from voicing personal opinions and suggestions. Young Emanuel's piping voice wasn't easily silenced when he thought he knew best, and as often as not he was right, for his prowess at chess was steadily improving. To make up for so much hunger, cold and lack of sleep, the boy's willpower must have been quite remarkable. Even so, it wasn't a state of things that could last in the long run, and once again a radical change had to be initiated from the parental home. This time Adolf put in a personal appearance to remove his younger son from the dangers of Berlin. He took him to Landsberg, a small town where a friend of the family, one Cohen, was to look after the boy while he went to the local grammar school. If indeed it was his father's intention to save Emanuel from the temptations of chess, that laudable purpose was somewhat thwarted by the fact that Emanuel's favorite teacher at the Landsberg school happened to be a keen chess player. It was the mathematics master, Professor Casey Weitz, and many years later when Lasker's fame had spread round the world the professor published an interesting report about Emanuel's matric in April 1888, particularly about his prowess at mathematics, all the more remarkable since the mathematical test at the Landsberg school happened to be rather more difficult than anywhere else. Here it is. Find the largest cone circumscribed to, and the smallest cone inscribed in, a given sphere, To find the common tangents to an ellipse and a concentric hyperbola with the same lengths of the axes. 3. Construct a triangle, and calculate its sides and angles trigonometrically. If the side C equals 273, the perpendicular on it H4 equals 156 and the difference of the two remaining sides A, B equals 91 are given. 4. Find the partial fractions of 7x AF 7x, 176 5x3, LLX for 5x plus 4x3, 9x plus 6x plus 56xL4. Professor Kevitz reports that almost all the boys, most of them aged 18 or 19, fully needed the 5 hours allotted for this. The Hungry Schoolboy 17. Task all except young Lasker, who made a perfect job of it within a couple of hours. The professor says he was amazed, and so as to keep the boy occupied for the remaining 3 hours he gave him an even tougher nut to crack, this one. If a tangent is drawn to a circle, and its secants are drawn from the end point of the diameter perpendicular to the tangent, and if the lengths of the chords of the circle are cut off on these secants backwards from the point of intersection with the tangent, then the locus of all the points so obtained is a curve which is called the cissoid of diodes. This curve enables us to solve geometrically cubic equations in the reduced form x3 plus px equals q. Find the equation of the curve. Describe the shape of the curve. Explain the significance of the tangent to the circle for the curve. Find the ratio of the area between the curve and the tangent to the area of the circle. Find the length of arc of the curve inside the circle. If the cissoid is rotated about the diameter of the circle, a solid of revolution is obtained whose volume and surface area tend to infinity. Calculate its volume and surface area between the limits x equals q and x equals r. If the cissoid is rotated about its asymptote, show that the volume of the solid of revolution so obtained is finite, although its vertex is at an infinite distance. Determine the centers of gravity of these two solids of revolution and also the area bounded by the two branches of the curve and its asymptote. Here is the professor's comment and the rest of his report. Incredible as it seemed, Lasker coped with this one too. I might add that he shone in arithmetics rather than geometry. His drawing was shoddy, but his combinative powers were uncommonly developed. Now, as for chess, it so happened I was the president of the Landsberg Chess Club and also the club champion. Lasker would have loved to join the club, but being a schoolboy he could not be admitted. "Won't you play me a game, sir?" he would say more than once, but I had to tell him, "My dear Lasker, business before pleasure. You have to do your homework first, and not in maths only." He wasn't used to discipline, and he worked haphazardly, sometimes not at all, and then again for nights on end. He evidently felt 18. Emanuel Lasker, cramped by rules and regulations, and I frequently had to intercede for him when he got into trouble with one of the other masters. It was when we went for the usual annual summer outing that he approached me again with the request for a game, adding eagerly that he had brought a pocket set along, i.e. a small cardboard with slits to hold the chessmen. This time I readily agreed, and we started to play, as we were hiking through a wood, with the small board constantly changing hands. As the first game proceeded I soon saw that I was doomed, and in the second game I was determined not to underrate my young opponent. But Jay lost that one too, and after lunch I lost a third and a fourth game. Thereupon I offered the young man my best wishes for his future victories. Recommended Bill Good's Handbook Q for further study, and I warned him not to spend too much time on chess and never to forget that, once he got to the university, his mathematical studies must command his main attention. Maybe he would have lived up to such good advice had he not been forced by economic needs to use chess as a means of livelihood. I said maybe, for even then I could detect in him an ambitious streak, and indeed one of public ambition. How right he was, the kindly if somewhat pedantic old school master, how well he knew his pupil. Lasker certainly did not want to become a chess master. His public ambition aimed at altogether different targets, but his social and economic circumstances forced him to go the way he went. Lasker had been looking forward impatiently to the end of his Landsberg exile, and as soon as he had passed his exam, he went back to Berlin, back to the familiar atmosphere of the tea room where he would spend half the night to earn the few coins at the chess board or card table. Lasker wanted to study philosophy and mathematics, and his young and eager mind was bent on tackling the great unsolved riddles of the universe. As for chess and card games, they were merely a handy means of making just enough for rent and food, for college fees and books. He deeply resented and bitterly hated the way he had to make his living, but he knew no other. It wasn't a passionate desire for the game that made him a chess master, it was bitter need and harsh economic necessity, and while he gained worldwide fame by playing chess, he rather resented it and he grudged the time it cost him. 0 P. R. V. Bilgur v. de Loza Handbuch das Skakspiels, for well over a century the standard work of German chess literature. It may be assumed, though, that young Emanuel was well aware of it even before the professors recommended him. The Hungry Schoolboy 19. In those early days he felt deeply humiliated by looking so down at heel and shabby. There were times when Bertold and he were unable to go out together because they had only one pair of trousers between them, and since both of them earned some of their money by tutoring schoolboys, such lessons involved intricate problems of timing until another pair of trousers could be purchased. One of Emanuel's benefactors in those days was Jacob Hamburger, who gave him 10 marks a month, half the sovereign, the princely sum in Lasker's circumstances. But neither donor nor beneficiary could have imagined their closer links 20 years later, when Lasker was to marry Hamburger's daughter. Fortunately, Bertold by now was near the end of his studies. He soon became a highly renowned doctor and scientist, and his new treatment of thrombosis caused quite a stir in the medical profession. Much later in life he married Else Laskriski Eller, the poetess who is an imperishable niche in German literature. As for Adolf, naturally he gloried in the success of his clever sons, both of them soon to become quite famous, and it is significant of that family's amazing thirst for knowledge that the old man, well in his 60s, took up the study of Latin and Greek with youthful zest. As for the sisters, Kafila was highly sensitive, a dreamer mitigated by a strong sense of humor. She married and bore 5 children, 3 of whom survive, each in a different continent. When the Nazis came to power she found sanctuary with a friend of Emanuel's in Holland. She was 80 years old when taken to the gas chambers of Auschwitz for no one will ever know where. Amalia, the younger sister, was a woman of the world, strong-willed and not without some influence on her brother Emanuel in his earlier years. She did married and had 5 children. In later life she was an indispensable helpmate in brother Bertold's clinic. She died in 1939,